TCU and Louisiana in the New Mexico Bowl in Albuquerque. Not the matchup we expected, but it's the one we're being given. We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us on your favorite podcast platform. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. Yesterday was not the best day in the history of TCU athletics. Probably not going to write a coffee table book about how yesterday played out. Both men's and women's basketball teams fell. The women to South Carolina in a game that I think could still be in the long-term future good for them, but a wake-up call and a loss to Don Staley's squad. And then the men lost to Vandy, both those games at Dickies Arena. And unfortunately for the men, a trend of kind of some self-inflicted issues, turnovers being the big difference in a loss. And conference play is coming quickly for both those teams. So we'll break that down in segment 2. I'll get to some of your thoughts in segment 3, but we start today with TCU football and their bowl matchup. And going into Sunday, I was really excited. It's been a while since TCU has been in a bowl game like this. They were in the playoff a couple years back, which was awesome, and that's definitely what I prefer. I hope that Sonny Dykes can get the team back to that place in the next few years where Sunday matters, and that Selection Sunday matters in that regard. But the last kind of bowl game of this caliber that they played in was the Cheez-It Bowl. They did get selected for the Texas Bowl in 2020 during the COVID season. Had to forfeit, though, or the game did end up getting played because of a COVID outbreak. So we had thrown out a lot of possibilities. The projections said, hey, maybe the Guaranteed Rate Bowl in Arizona, maybe the Liberty Bowl in Memphis. That seemed to be the consensus in the days leading up to it, that they could play possibly Oklahoma, Arkansas, an SEC opponent. There was also the Texas Bowl as a possibility, even though that looked less likely because of the way the bowl tie-ins worked and the way the standings were shaking out. Well, Sunday afternoon comes around, and slowly you start to see these announcements come out. Baylor gets the Texas Bowl. Okay, well, didn't necessarily expect that one, so not a huge deal. Tech gets the Liberty Bowl. All right. Thought that was going to be the destination. Kansas State gets the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, and TCU ends up in the New Mexico Bowl, and they will be playing Louisiana, formerly Louisiana Lafayette. Billy Napier used to coach there. Pretty good team. They're 10-3 this year. Not sure what happened to them in the conference title game. Took a beating to Marshall, but they beat Wake Forest earlier this season. So it's not a school that you can just sleepwalk and go beat, but it's a group of 5 opponent when you're expecting to possibly play a Big Ten opponent or an SEC team. And it's hard not to be disappointed as a fan and how this ended up and how this shook out. And so the big question that's been on everybody's mind, how did this happen? Because if you look at the bowl tie-ins for the Big 12, the games that are sanctioned to them, the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, the Liberty Bowl, Alamo Bowl, which BYU and Colorado ended up there, Pop-Tarts Bowl, Iowa State. And then after you get through those bowl games, it falls into something called the ESPN pool. And what that means is a lot of these bowl games are just programming for ESPN. It's games, it's live games that they can put on in the middle of Christmas break when a lot of their talent that does daily shows is on vacation and people aren't necessarily sitting in front of the TV as much to watch, pardon the interruption or something like that. So instead, you turn on the TV and instead of talking to your cousin's new boyfriend, you just watch a football game. You watch Western Kentucky and Central Michigan battle it out in Cancun or whatever the case is, right? That's the point of bowl games in large part now that the playoff is in existence. And also for the teams, it's really good practice time. It's one more chance to get your team out there. It's a time to get another victory. But ESPN works with all these different bowl partners to throw teams here and there. So West Virginia and TCU were the 2 schools that landed in this ESPN pool of games. West Virginia got sent to the Frisco Bowl, where they will play Memphis, and TCU got sent to the New Mexico Bowl, where they will play Louisiana. And for West Virginia, it makes sense. They finished 6-6. They won their last game of the season to get bowl eligible. The New Mexico Bowl is the type of game that I would expect TCU to be in if they had beaten Cincinnati on the last day of the season to finish 6-6 instead of 5-7. It's not where I would expect them to go when they finish with 8 wins. And just looking at the standings, I mean, there's a world here. So the Frogs finished 6th. There was essentially a 3-way tie between Baylor, TCU, and Texas Tech. All those teams played each other. Baylor has the edge because they beat Texas Tech and they beat TCU. TCU lost to Baylor. So Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech. So Texas Tech is technically behind them in the standings. So in my mind, I would think TCU should get the first shot at the Liberty Bowl. But even if it didn't, even if the Liberty Bowl was like, well, these teams ended up with the same record, both overall and in the conference. TCU won a head-to-head game at home, but there's not much difference there. So they take Texas Tech. Okay, I guess you could make up a reason for that just based on what happened on the field. Kansas State also finished 8-4, but they finished 5-4 in conference play. They finished behind TCU in the standings. So why was TCU not slotted to the Guaranteed Rate Bowl? Why did they end up in the New Mexico Bowl? And there's 2 possibilities here, and both of them are not great news for TCU. The first one is a rumor that's going around that somehow the administration had something to do with this. Whether it was Jeremiah Donati before he left telling the Liberty Bowl, you know what, we don't want to be there and we'd rather go somewhere else, so please don't invite us. Or the current administration saying something similar that kept them out of Memphis, and then the dominoes fell to where they ended up in Albuquerque. Now, for the record, officially, Steven Johnson from the Fort Star Telegram, he was asked about this directly on Twitter yesterday. He said, I spoke to someone in the TCU admin about this, and they're adamant they didn't and wouldn't turn down any bowl game. Now, to be fair, if they were going to turn down a bowl game, I doubt they'd be talking about it publicly. But I will say, I'm not saying it's not a possibility. I don't really know why or how or what the benefit of that would be. Unless now, one of our frequent listeners, viewers, Fred, he chimed in yesterday and said that he thought Donati turned it down because they had a bad experience in the past and something about the Big 12 sideline being under construction currently in Memphis and it not being a great place to go. But if that's the case, I would just be very, very confused. Because even if Memphis wasn't the best place to go the last time you were there, which that was a long time ago. And that was 2016 when Kenny Hill took them in there against Georgia and they lost. But even if that was not the best experience, you'd be playing Arkansas in, a relatively big-time bowl game comparatively. And that seems like a good way to end the season. The other possibility is that these bowl games, they just looked at the options they had and they kind of ignored the standings and said, you know what? I think Texas Tech would be a better fit, or I think Kansas State would be better for us. And that's also not great news for TCU. Now, to calm everybody down, I don't think the national perception of this is going to make waves. So I don't feel like people are waking up today and they're zeroed in on why the heck did TCU end up in Albuquerque. SMU people are going to make fun of us because they ended up in the college football playoff, which stinks. I'm sure Baylor and Tech and some other rivals might have some fun at our expense. But for the most part, I think it's hard to – bowl games have changed so much, even in the past decade. Outside of the playoff, I don't really think national writers and media folks are analyzing these games nearly as much as they used to or looking at how the matchups shake out and all those things. To me, this is tough on 2 counts. One, it's tough on the team just because, you get a chance to go win a game, which would be awesome. And that's the goal, and that's what you want to do. But I think defeating a Power 4 opponent to end the season would have been a great springboard into next year. But you know what? You get the team you get, and you get Louisiana. We better be ready to strap it up and go, because they're going to be ready. And I think there'll be some opt-outs. I don't imagine Savion Williams is going to play. I don't imagine Jack Besh is going to play. Possibly guys like Bud Clark, Bless Harris, who, it's year 5 and they're preparing to take a shot at the NFL. But you still should have a number of your starters available. And you got to put your best game plan out there and go play a good football game and finish the year with some good momentum. You got a chance to go 6-1 in your last 7. That would be pretty awesome. The other thing that I'm disappointed about is I know that many of you watching and listening would have planned to have gone to the bowl game, and that would have been a fun thing for your holiday, week or whatever the case was, whether it was in Houston, which would have been awesome for TCU fans, to roll up there and play LSU and be close by for so many of you that are in Texas or Memphis. And my guy Richard was talking about how he hoped to be the Pop-Tarts Bowl because he's in the Southeast and TCU just doesn't get over there very often. So it would be really convenient for him. This is not a convenient trip for him. And I know it's not a convenient trip for a lot of people. And it doesn't have the most cachet. But it's the game you got. And I think it behooves TCU to put on an outstanding effort and go win it and continue to build on what they did in the season. So I don't think from like a national perspective, a cachet perspective, this is some huge loss. But I do think for the people that were excited about a bowl trip, it's disappointing. And for the players who were probably thinking, man, we're going to get this outstanding matchup, they're probably bummed out today too. But you know what? You play who's on the schedule, and TCU has a chance to go in a ball game. If they did, for some reason, turn down or basically tell the Liberty Bowl or some other bowl, you know what, thanks but no thanks, I would have a lot of questions as to why and how and what the reasoning for that was, as I'm sure many of you would. And I can't give you a good answer for it. I don't know if not having a permanent AD in place really hurt them in this selection process, but I don't see a single good reason why you would pass up on a bigger bowl, quote unquote, to go play in this one, unless you thought you had something else lined up and you turned down a Liberty Bowl and you ended up with egg on your face. But there's nothing official about that. I don't think there ever will be. I'm just very confused about how this shook out and what happened and what the repercussions were as to why TCU ended up in this game instead of some others. But Louisiana, we're going to be here. We're going to cover it. I'll have plenty of coverage over the next few weeks of what this looks like. Bowl practices are going to start up soon. Transfer portal's open today. So still a lot of football news going on. And we'll have plenty of coverage here on Locked On Horned Frogs. When we come back, though, we'll transition to some basketball talk. Both the men and women lost yesterday. And so we'll look at those matchups. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. One of our new sponsors, our holiday sponsors, Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks make it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. Legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE, 50% off at omahasteaks.com, and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Omaha Steaks, give it a try today. Get that gift for the person you love. So 2 games in Dickies Arena yesterday, and one of those was a top 10 matchup. TCU women took on South Carolina. Coming in this ball game, TCU was number 9 in the country. They are going to drop a little bit after this loss. Don't know exactly where they'll end up in the AP poll, but they fell to South Carolina 85-52. And this was a close game for about 10 minutes. It was a close game in the first quarter. South Carolina had a 20-14 lead at the end of the first. And TCU hung around in that first quarter, and then they pulled away after that. South Carolina, a super balanced team. I mean, there wasn't like one person that just ran away with it. Melissa Foley was the leading scorer. She had 20 points, and she came off the bench, 8 of 15 from the field. Raven Johnson was 3 of 6 from 3. She had 11 points. Chloe Kitts, who was their leading scorer coming into the game, only had 4 points. They just anybody and everybody did what they wanted. Ashton, there was a different level of athleticism on the floor yesterday, and it was apparent from the jump. In the first quarter, Ashlyn Watkins came down the floor. Madison Connor was dribbling, and Ashlyn was on defense, and she stole the ball, took it the length of the floor, and then threw a dunk down. And Sedona Prince went to contest it, and if she actually got up, I think she would have been on a poster. But she ended up kind of just running by, trying to close out on it. But that was super impressive, and that set the tone for the rest of the night. Mark Campbell said after the game, Notre Dame and NC State are really good teams, but this is a different level of a team. I don't know how South Carolina lost to UCLA earlier this year, but they're the defending champs for a reason. I mean, last season, you got some new faces here, but that Caitlin Clark Iowa team, that wasn't a super close game. I mean, it was competitive even into the fourth quarter. But ultimately, South Carolina took care of business. And aside from getting tripped up by LSU in the Final Four a few years ago, they have not really been challenged in the last few seasons. So it's a wake-up call. Nobody shot the ball well yesterday for TCU. Haley Van Lith had a tough night. She ended up with 21 points, but with 7 of 17 from the field and 1 of 5 from 3. Sedona Prince only had 6 points, didn't get a ton of looks. It was just that defense. They swarm people. They are athletic. They cut down the airspace. They make everything difficult. And once they really get going on that end of the floor, it's tough to keep up because they can also get buckets. And they ended up dropping 82 points on a TCU team that's played pretty well defensively this year. And also, to this point, nobody has shut them down. But South Carolina had the recipe last night. So, a good opportunity for Mark Campbell's squad to see, like, okay, this is what if we're going to have national championship type of aspirations, this is what we're working against, and this is where we have to get better. They play Louisiana Tech on Sunday the 15th, then Samford a couple of days later, and then they get UCF in their first conference game on the 21st. So conference play coming up quickly. This doesn't, in my mind, really change much at all about their Big 12 trajectory. I still think they're going to be a team that competes for a title there. Now, once you get in the tournament and you get deeper into the NCAA tournament, hopefully it's going to be tough sledding. But I don't think last night showed as much about TCU as it did South Carolina, and that they're really good, and that TCU's got some ground to make up before the end of the year if they're going to be considered in the upper echelon of some of these teams that we've been talking about at the top. And then the men's team fell to Vandy in a pretty high-scoring ball game, but they end up losing that one. And their next game will be South Alabama a week from now on the 16th. But final score in that Vandy game, they fall 83-74. They shot about 60%, TCU did, from three-point range in the first half, and they ended up trailing by 3. They just could not slow that Vandy offense down, and they turned the ball over so much, and that was a real killer. Vanderbilt only had 6 turnovers. TCU had Vandy had 12 turnovers, and TCU had 18. But Frogs shot the ball really well. I mean, efficient shooting night, but they turned the ball over. They could not find a way to slow down Vandy on offense. The one thing I'll say about this men's team that's encouraging for me, David Punch, freshman, has been great. I like what I've seen from Michael Robinson. And I think if the season continues to go like this, where you're dropping a lot of games, you got to find a way to get those young guys more involved. Give them minutes, give them opportunities. That's your future. Use it as like a developmental year for those guys. because that's who you need to step up in the next few seasons. So men got 2 more games, but about 3 more weeks until conference play starts. They'll get this week off for finals and that type of thing. Tough basketball day, though, for the Frogs as both teams fell in their respective games at Dickies Arena. We'll come back and get some of your thoughts on the show from Friday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, where the game starts. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com today. Don't forget, you hit on one $5 bet, you get $150 in bonus bets if you sign up today. Bengals Cowboys tonight, college hoops all week long, college football bowl season getting started up soon. It's all available to you on the FanDuel app or at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. Give it a try today. Again, that's the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com, official betting partner of the National Football League. So on Friday, I talked about how one of the things that is intriguing about having a new athletic director on campus in the near future is what it does with different coaching staffs and how it might reset the clock a little bit, because you got a new person in charge who doesn't have that relational capital with the coaches that Jeremiah Donati had. So specifically for football, does it put more pressure on Sonny Dykes? I would say yes for next year, because although he's had unprecedented success in some ways, the last few seasons have been more inconsistent, and you don't have someone who hired you now in charge, and so that changes that dynamic a little bit. Tebow says you have the top 20 recruiting class in the country and you want to get rid of them. Don't think so. I'm not advocating to get rid of them. I'm just saying, like, I think this is a huge year for him and his coaching staff. And if they don't produce, there's a chance they could be gone. And yes, you do have a top 20 recruiting class right now. And hopefully those guys get on the field and contribute. And if they do, I don't feel like there's going to be any problems here. But if things go south, then I feel like this change in administration adds another wrinkle to that storyline. Vince is on board. He says, finally, you're saying what I'm saying. TCU can't wait for the offensive line to sort itself out. And he thinks that this offensive-minded coach has misevaluated his players. He uses the example of it taking 6 games to figure out how to use Savion Williams correctly. Yeah, there's been some misses. And I feel like next year is really the season where you have to start saying, okay, we can't continue to blame the issues in the trenches on Gary and the previous coaching staff. Like, that's been a legitimate complaint, but you've recruited pretty heavily there, especially on the offensive line side of things. You've taken guys in the portal, and you've kind of hodgepodged and cobbled together 2 different offensive lines through portal additions that have been, I would say, mediocre at best. Now, I think there's hope that they're going to be better next year with a guy like Cade Bennett coming back, potentially a young player like Ryan Hughes slipping in at tackle or going and get a tackle in the portal. James Brockermeyer returning, Colton Deary, Carson Bruno, Ben Taylor Whitfield. You've got continuity in this spot for really the first time since your first season on campus, which should be a big benefit. But you got to actually go and do it. Frog fan is not happy with the matchup with Louisiana in the New Mexico Bowl. He feels like a lot of guys are going to opt out. I mean, it's possible. I think there's a few surefire draft picks, and then the question is going to be the other seniors, how they handle it. But I do believe also this could be a chance to get some young guys on the field and kind of see what your future looks like, and that's a cool benefit too. And then Fred said, what a laugh. This is by far your worst pod. I need Fred to rank my top 10 worst podcasts. Apparently Friday was my worst one, but I need to know, like, which was next. Probably one where my USB microphone was malfunctioning, or that month before the season where I had pneumonia and I was struggling to breathe and you could hear it. You could hear it in the microphone each and every day. I'm very sorry for that. I really didn't know it was that bad. And I apologize for all of you that suffered through it. If you did, you're a real one. But sorry, Fred, to disappoint you. Fred thinks I'm stupid for suggesting that Sonny will be on the hot seat because he's gone 26-13. He's recruited his way out of a horrible roster situation, and the team should be set up to contend for a conference title next season. Yes, I agree with you, Fred. I think they should contend for a conference title next season, which would tell you that if they don't, a lot of pressure should fall on the coaching staff. That was my point. I think they'll be good. I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but if they are bad, I think there'll be a lot of questions to answer, and it'll be another year where there's more questions than answers. And yes, he's 26-13, but he is 14-12 or 14-13 since going 12-0 to start his tenure. So I think we both know that's a little disingenuous. I mean, he deserves credit for those wins, but it's not like we're talking about a dude who was 9-3 and 7-5 and 8-4 and has shown consistent success. They had an outstanding year. He deserves a lot of credit for that. And then the last 2 seasons, they've taken a step back. And if next year they get back to, if they build on this 8-4 season, then I don't think we have any questions about this. But if they don't, then I feel like, yeah, it's fair to say after 4 years, what's the future look like? So I don't think it's crazy to suggest that someone who doesn't have that type of relational capital with Sonny might evaluate things differently than Jeremiah Donati did. But I appreciate you. And please let me know my top 10 worst podcasts and where this falls as one of them. Appreciate you guys listening to the show today. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts.